in particular how to set up campaigns and the various options and features that you can use that perhaps you're not currently using. We're going to start off by having a look at the setting up of the campaign and the relevant codes that are necessary in order for you to be able to set up the campaign. Now, some of you may have got campaigns set up on your master, on your start menu. There are, if you're not aware, two buttons, the volunteers and raffles, which if I right-click on them, you can see that one of them has changed to campaign setup and the other one has changed to archive, and that's because I've set them up that way. In order to get to campaign setup, if you haven't set that up for yourself like that, all you need to do is go from the start menu, go to main menu, go into whatever your system name would be, and fundraising, and then in the list you'll see campaign setup. So now we have the campaign setup menu there with the various options that we need. We're going to start off first of all by looking at the thank you letter code. When you have a campaign, in order for you to be able to receipt that campaign or donations to it, it's ideal to set up a particular thank you letter code for that particular campaign so that when the receipt goes out, the letter that goes with it is relevant to what that donor has given. So if they're giving to your campaign for tax 2014, the document could say, thank you for your donation to our tax appeal for 2014, and then perhaps explain how the money is going to be used. Now, in order for you to do that, there needs to be a letter code set up within Donman. Now, there's two different ways about creating these codes. You could create a code specifically for your tax 2014 campaign, or you could alternatively just create one for tax. If you did one for tax 2014, then next year you would probably then create a new letter for tax 2015, and then 2016, etc. And so you'd have a lot of these thank you letter codes that really are only of use for a short period of time. If alternatively you just created one letter code called tax, then you could set up the appropriate letter for that, and then next year when you set up your next campaign, you would be able to use the same letter code and simply change the actual wording of the letter tax document so that it is appropriate for the 2015 tax appeal. Now, if you've actually created codes before, then creating a thank you letter code is not really much different. So I'll go into that thank you letter code now, and by clicking on the drop-down list, I can have a look at all the various codes that are currently in there. Now, I'm having a look there, and I can't see one there for tax or tax 2014, whichever way I decide to go. So I'm going to create a new one. So I'll just cancel the drop-down list. And in the code, I just type in tax, because I'm going to create a generic one that I can use every year from now on. I'll just call it generic tax thank you letter. And when we enter through, by default, it will always say no to archive and yes to display. When I press enter at the bottom there, it says press enter to save. So when I do that, something different is going to come up that probably won't come up for you, and that's because I've set something up that's a little bit different. So I'm going to press enter now, and it's come up with this question that says, do you want to create a letter for this code now? I'm going to say yes, and what this is going to do is it's going to open up Microsoft Word with a shell letter that I have created that is going to be the basis for all of my letters. Now, the only reason that it has actually popped this question up is because I have a document in my DM work directory called shell_letter.doc or .docx. If either of those two are there, then it will ask me if I wish to create a letter for that code. If that document, the shell_letter document, is not there, you won't get that message, and it just creates the actual code and nothing else. So I'm now going to say yes, and it now is starting Word, and here is the contents of my letter. Now you can see here I have created that, and in that letter it says this is shell_letter.docx. Please type your thank you letter text here. So this is a great way of just coming up with a very base document. Obviously you would put more words in than what I've got there. You may, if you wish, also include various merge fields. So if you create a document called shell_letter.doc or shell_letter.docx, then it will automatically pop this up. Now if you look up the top, you can see the document name that it's created. It's called lettertax.docx. Now if your embedded letters are of the .doc style, then you should create shell_letter.doc. Whereas if all of your embedded letters are the new format, the docx, then you should create a document called shell_letter.docx. And I would suggest that if you have one of your current letters that works, I would perhaps save that as your shell_letter document, because that way any new document that you create should have the same basic formatting as the letter that you know works. So typically what I would type in here would be thanks for your donation to our Tax 2014 campaign, etc., and I would save that away. If you don't have one of these shell_letter.doc or docs files, you have to create the corresponding Word document yourself. Now you'll notice that the name of it, lettertax.docx in my case, it's exactly the same as the actual code that was created, which we call tax, but it has the word letter in front of it. Now there's no space between them, so it's just simply lettertax. So if you don't have it automatically created for you like I have, then you just create a document in Word with the relevant text and you save it as letter followed by whatever the code is that you have requested. Okay, so let's assume that I've now saved that away and everything's fine. I can now create subsequent letters as well. You may, if you wish, choose to have multiple letters for the one campaign. We could have letter tax 1 and letter tax 2, or the actual code would be tax 1 and tax 2. And you could say that one of them would be relevant for, say, donations under maybe $200, and the other one could be relevant for donations over $200. And you can automatically get Donman to actually pick the relevant letter based on the amount given in the donation. This is often used where for any donation under, say, $200, they get a scanned signature. Anything over $200, they actually get a person to sign it for real. Okay, so once we've got our letter code set up and we've actually got the corresponding document set up, then we can move on. Now just a word of warning too, when you do set up that thank you letter, the actual Word document, you don't need to put name and address details at the top nor the actual receipt details at the bottom. They would normally be part of your master receipt. Okay, the next code that we may need to create a new one for is the chart of accounts or ledger code. And again, this is very similar to what we've seen for most of the other codes. The only real difference here is that we have an extra question that relates to GST. Again, we can look at our drop-down list and pick one that's already there if we need to, but I'll create a new one, and I'm just going to make up some numbers, 123.456.789. Now, the actual ledger codes can be up to 16 characters long, so it should be able to cope with most codes that people have, and I'll say this is for tax appeals, something like that. So again, it's no to archive, yes to display. Now I've got three choices here. I can say it's deductible, non-deductible, or exempt. Now if I choose non-deductible, then anytime we run any form of ledger report, if there are donations to this ledger code, it will attract GST and there'll be a GST calculation. Also, any receipts that go out would typically includes GST and whatever the value was for that. Now, if it's deductible or exempt, then that won't be the case. So I'm going to say that this is deductible. Okay, so I've got my ledger code there. The next step is the bank account codes. Now, most of the time, once you've set up your bank account code, you probably never need to touch it again unless you change banks or start up a new bank account code. So I've got one that I've got here, so it's got the basic details there, the bank account, the account name, the account number, sorry, BSB, and then the merchant numbers for the various credit cards if you use those. So most of the time you rarely need to go into this, so you don't normally have to go there to set up your campaign. Okay, so once we've got all of the relevant codes that we need, we can now go to campaign code. Okay, so let's just quickly have a very brief look at an existing campaign. So here we've got one called CACQ is the campaign name. We've got the full name or description, and under that we have the group code. And a little bit later on, when we actually create our new campaign, we'll talk a lot about these various things, and the use of the group code can make life a lot easier for you when you're doing selections or reports and things like that. We've got in the middle, we've got the stats to say just how far we've gone so far with our campaign. Over on the right, we've got a little thermometer, which in this case is telling us that we're 95% of the way towards our target. And then we've got some details down the bottom, which are actually used as default values when we process donations. Okay, we have a dollar symbol down the bottom, just like we do on the donor record, and if I click on that, it should show me a list of all of the donations, just like when you look at a donor record. We've got a summary over the years of how well that campaign's been going. If we've recorded any campaign costs, we can see those here as well, and reversals, and if it's a function campaign, there may even be some function records associated with that. Okay. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to clear the screen and we'll actually create a new campaign. So in order to do that, the campaign code itself can be up to 12 characters long. Now there are different ways of naming these, and it's good to have some sort of standard. Now I myself would probably call this something like Tax 14 or perhaps Tax 2014. Other places would go 14 Tax. And there are reasons why one or the other might be better for your organization. When you're doing selections or doing a report and you need to tell it what campaigns you want to use, you can usually use generic names. So if you wanted to pull up a list of, say, all of your tax campaigns, if your campaign codes are all Tax 13, Tax 14, Tax 15, you can just go Tax asterisk, and that will then pick any campaign that starts with the word tax. If, however, you've done it the other way and you've called it things like 14 general, 14 Christmas, 14 tax, then you could pull up all campaigns that start with 14 if you were trying to do a report on just donations through this year. Although in most cases you can usually limit that also by the date ranges, depending on what type of report you're running. So depending on the circumstances, it may be better to use 14 tax as the code, or it might be better to use Tax 2014. Whichever way you go with it, it's usually better to try and be consistent, and then it makes life easier for yourself down the track. When you want to pull up all the tax campaigns, you know that they're all maybe 13 tax, 14 tax, 15 tax. Whereas if sometimes you put 13 winter and sometimes you go winter 14 and others you go tax 12, it just makes life very difficult. In this case, I'll call it Tax 2014, and I'm going to give it a full name that's pretty much the same, Tax Appeal 2014. I better get that right. Now, when I come to the group code, by default, it's going to be the same as the campaign code. Now that's okay for certain campaigns that really are by themselves, but there are times where there are certain campaigns that might like to be grouped together. And this makes it easier when we're trying to run a report on that group of campaigns. Instead of having to nominate each of those campaigns, we can just use a campaign group. Now if I look at the existing campaign groups, you can see a whole lot of different campaigns there. a whole lot of campaign groups. Now, there's nothing there for donation, so I'm actually going to just call this one donation as the campaign group. So what that means is that any other donation campaign that has the same group code of donation will then effectively be part of the same group. So later on, if I want to do a report on the donation campaign group, I just have to nominate that campaign group, and any campaign that's part of that campaign group will be selected for that report or for the selections. You don't set up campaign groups anywhere else. You just simply go to a campaign record and type in whatever you want that group code to be. You can, at any stage, pull up an old campaign and group that under a new name. So I could go to one of my previous campaigns and make that part of the campaign group donation. So it's a very useful feature, and I would advise you to at least try and group similar campaigns together, because that'll make your life a lot easier. We're going to say we start our campaign today, so I'm just going to go T for today, and for those that don't know, anytime you're in the date field, if you type T for today, that will give you today's date when I press enter. Or I can go T plus or minus any number of days. So if I think I'm going to start my campaign in 10 days, I can go T plus 10 and press enter. Now, when I come to the end date, if I put an end date in, once that end date has occurred, that campaign is considered closed. And if I'm processing a donation and I request a list of campaigns that I can process to, it will not come up in that list. You can still process to that generally. If you know the campaign, you can still select it, but it just won't be in the drop-down list. If you're not sure when you want to close the campaign, just leave the campaign date blank, and then maybe later on, when you feel it's time, you can update this campaign record with a close date. Now, when I press enter on this, it's going to give me a pop-up screen where I can choose what type of campaign it is that this is. Now, depending on how I set this campaign up, when you process the donation, different things will happen. The first question says, is it a pledge campaign? And if I say no, it will skip over the next 4 or 5 questions, and it will jump straight down to, is it a sales campaign? If I said yes, then it will ask me if I wanted special pledge receipts, which are different from the normal ones. Is it a one-off pledge campaign? Sorry, sorry about that. So if it's a one-off pledge, that's like when you're doing maybe a telethon and someone rings up and says, yes, I'll give you $100. It's just a one-off pledge. Subscription campaigns and membership campaigns are special forms of pledge campaigns, as is child sponsorship if you have the child sponsorship system. I'm going to say no, it's not a pledge campaign. If it's a sales campaign, then if you're selling tickets to a ball perhaps, or maybe you're selling merchandise of some form, then you can say yes, it is a sales campaign, and if you've got the product system, you can then associate products with that. I'll say no again. It's not a raffle, it's not an in memoriam. That's if someone dies and they say, well, don't send flowers in a donation to whoever it is. Or it could be for gifts in lieu when there's a birthday or a wedding anniversary or anything like that. Again, I'll say no to that. Now, we have a few new ones here that you may not be familiar with. These have been introduced in that last update that came out a couple of months ago. That's version 7.5.10. And we've got, well, actually function campaigns has been there a little while, but bequest, made a gift and grant campaigns are all new. And these are very useful when it comes to analysing your data, especially when it comes to the dashboard. Now, our webinar for next month should be on the dashboard, so you'll see how these things can be very useful for just looking at where your money is coming from. I'm just going to say no to each of those as well. Now, on the second donor screen, we have 3 sections there. We've got one section which is called the donor summary history, and that keeps track of their highest ever donation, their first ever donation, and then their last 3 donations. Some organisations would like that information to be for pure donations. So if they're buying a ticket to your ball or buying merchandise, they don't want that information to be updated with those purchases. So under those circumstances, they can say, no, don't update the summary history for this campaign. So I do want that to update, so I'll leave it as a yes. The same thing applies to the summary totals. So that's the overall total in count. That's also the total in count this year and the total in count last year. So normally you would probably turn them both to no if you didn't want those updated. It skips over the next question, and if you didn't want it to appear in a drop-down list, so when you're doing a report or something like that and you didn't want to see this campaign, we could say yes to hide it. Okay, now having done that, you'll see towards the top there it says this is an ordinary campaign, but this will actually tell you what type of campaign it is. So it might say this is a pledge campaign or this is a sales campaign, and it won't update the summary history or whatever. If we're trying to raise a certain amount of money, I can put in $10,000, say, and it will use that to calculate the little bar graph or the thermometer over on the side. If I've already done the mail out, I can type a number to be mailed or who are being mailed here. Alternatively, if you update the donor mail history, when you have prepared your mail out, you can then actually tell it there's an option there to update the number mailed on the campaign record. So that's probably a better or more accurate way of doing it. We can't do the costs now, but the campaign costs can be done down below. So I can put a comment in there. I'm not going to bother about that. So when I create a campaign for the first time, the edit letter codes has come up as a yes. So when I press enter on that, it gives me the option there. Now, I think this has come up because, with those options there on that screen because I previously brought up the old campaign. That's all right. The top option there gives you the ability to send a special letter that goes to people who are giving their very first donation. So you could set up a special letter that says, you know, thanks for your first donation. We will send you a regular newsletter, etc., etc. Other than that, if you leave that blank, then everybody will get the same letter. Now I'm just going to blank this out from blank to blank, and it puts the highest number there, which is like 999,000 or something like that. And from the drop-down list, I'm just going to pick tax. I just type a T and it gets me straight there. And so tax, it blanks out everything else. So what that's saying is essentially no matter how much they give, be it $1 or $9 million, they're all going to get the same letter, which is that one called tax. If you did want to have separate letters for under $200 and over $200, then you would have gone from blank to, say, $199.99, and you would have given them the first letter. And then from 200 to effectively infinity, we will give them the second letter. Okay, the bank account, well, we can just pick one of those bank accounts that we've already set up. So I'll pick up our second one. When we enter on that, we've got the ledger code. So again, I'm going to pick, I think, what do we call it? 123.456, this one here. So I'll pick that one. Now, the details for receipts is what's going to come out on the itemized portion of the receipt. So you might just say donation or gift, or you might actually say something like tax 2014 gift. That's really up to you. You do have to specify something, and even if you know that you'll never give a receipt for it, you've got to put something there. So even if you put a full stop, that will keep it happy. Now, when I press enter, it's going to jump straight down to this press enter to continue. However, it skips over this refer to field. If this was a special campaign that you wanted all donations to appear in the refer to report to one person, then you could actually pop that person's name in the refer to list. This is very useful for things like maybe a bequest campaign, where when somebody dies and they give a bequest to you, it will go to this campaign. You could then, in the refer to field, put the code specific to your bequest officer, so every time a bequest donation came in, he or she would appear on the refer to list, and you could then pass that on to your bequest officer. Okay, so I'm going to press enter to continue, and I have now saved away that particular campaign. Now, having done that, when you process your donations, that now will be in that list because we've given it a start date, but we haven't given an end date. When you first set up that campaign, quite often there are certain costs associated with that. So in order to be able to put those costs against that campaign, we can simply type it in, or I can just select it from the drop-down list. So I want it tax 2014. So now that I've brought up that particular campaign, I can click on campaign costs and add any costs that are associated with that. So I'll use today's date to say on this date, and then from the cost code, hopefully I've got something I can use. Let's say I'm going to create some mail, and the amount's going to be $1,000. And I'll just say mail house charges. Okay, I can put another one in there for today, and maybe I'll just say general, something like that, and that will be $500, and that was stationery costs. I hope I've spelt the stationery the right way. So when I close that, it now says that my cost of $1,500, and just looking at the stats in the middle, everything is zero in here because I haven't received any donations, but you'll see that the profit is now a loss of $1,500. If I click on the dollar, you can see a list of those costs that I've just added. And any time that you've got more costs that you incur along the way, you can simply click on the campaign costs button and add those costs as well. Now let's go back and quickly have a look at the original one that we were looking at, and we'll discuss those stats in the middle. Now in this case, we've got three columns here. You've got donations from new donors, donations from past donors, and donations from all donors. Now all donors is obviously the sum of the new donors and the past donors. The donations that fall under the new donors column are those donations that have come from donors who have never given to you before. They may have actually existed in your donor file for the last 10 years, but this is their first ever donation. If those people subsequently give another donation to the same campaign, those subsequent donations will appear under past donors. So in this case, we've got 21 donations from new donors and 345 donations from existing donors for a total of 366. We also have the total amount from each of those three areas. Now, the percentage response is the number of donations we've got as opposed to the number mailed. So we've mailed 5,000, 21 out of 5,000 actually represents 0.42%, and 345 out of 5,000 represents 6.9%, for a total of 7.32% response rate. The average donation is fairly straightforward. It's just the total amount for each of the columns divided by the number of donations. Underneath here we've got the profit. So what we've got over here, we've got the total amount that we've raised is just close to $95,000, but we've got $102,000 of costs. So it's saying so far during this campaign we've actually lost $7,700. What that dollar return says, for every one of those dollars that we spent, we've only got 92 cents back. So if that figure there is less than $1, you have lost money. And finally, the cost of acquisition says for each new donor that we have acquired, how much did we effectively pay? And what it does is it will take the loss, so 7,600, divide that by 21 to say for each of those 21 donors, the new ones, it's effectively cost us $366 to acquire them. Now, if there were more donations coming in and eventually that profit was reduced to zero, then the cost of acquisition would be zero. So any new donors that you had gained, you had effectively gained for nothing. But looking at that, what that means is that if this is the end of the campaign, it's cost you a lot of money to gain the new donors, and you can only hope that maybe when you mail to these people for the next appeal, you can recoup your costs. Okay, what we'll have a look at finally will be a couple of important, there's one last thing that we can do as well here. Now, I'm not sure whether you're aware that you can duplicate donor records by using Shift F10. So we can do the same thing on the campaign screen as well. So if we had something there, let me find another campaign that might have a year in there. Okay, so let's say ball May 2005. I'll bring that up there. Let's suppose we now have a new ball and we're going to do that in 2014. What we can do is, rather than creating a brand new campaign from scratch, we can actually create a new campaign based on this one. And to do that, all I have to do is do Shift F10. No, sorry, I'm telling you a lie. It's Control F12. I'm sorry. So Control F12, and it brings. Sorry. Oh. What do I want a new campaign? I'm going to say yes, I do. And now I have to specify that campaign, so I'm just going to change that to ball 2014. And when I press enter, it has created a new campaign. Now, obviously, things like the full name will be wrong, so I'll just change that, 2014. And I'll change the start date to 2014 as well. But everything else in the middle is already zeroed out. But I have the same bank account code. I've got the same group code as well, same ledger code, same details for receipts. And if I go to letter codes, this is where I can look at what the letter codes are or change those if necessary. So in this case, we've got a letter Y. I'm sure that's not meant to be there, so I'll just delete that. And so this is getting letter 1. Well, I could pick a different campaign if I wanted to change it. Well, who knows, I'll put it as a test letter. So I can then save that letter away. And so that just simply, okay, so we've got some things there that no longer exist. So I'll just pick our code again. Do we have that code? Yep. All right, so if you're creating a large number of codes, campaign codes, it's very convenient to be able to create one and then duplicate it. Now, if you do segmented appeals, like you might run an appeal for tax campaign for 2014, but you might actually send one letter to your current donors. You might send one letter to your lapsed donors, perhaps people that haven't given in the last year or two. You might have a different letter for, say, your corporate donors, and you might have a different letter for your major donors. If you want to track how much money you get from each of those different segments, you would need to create a campaign for each of those. And if you've done that, you can actually create the first one with all the relevant details, perhaps creating a different group code, and maybe the group code in this case would be Tax 2014, and the campaign code might be Tax 2014 Major, or Tax 2014 Current, or whatever the campaign code is. You create one of those with all the relevant details, and then you could simply duplicate that one 4 or 3 or 4 times to create all the other codes with basically the same information. If you update the donor mail history for each of those 4 segments, when you process a donation, there's an option there that it will automatically pick the appropriate campaign when they give a donation. So that then becomes a very nice feature to save you having to look up to work out which campaign you need to process that donation to. Okay, so finally, what I'm going to have a look at now is just a couple of reports that we can run. So if I go to the Start menu, I can then go to Reports and then to Campaign Reports. And the two that we're going to have a look at are the Periodic Campaign Results and the Summary Cumulative Reports. Now, the Periodic Campaign Results looks at donations within a period. So let me run this. Now, I should warn you, on our training system that I'm using here, we probably don't have a large number of donations, and there's probably not a lot for this year, but I'll try anyway. So I'll type 01/01/14, and I'll just leave the end date blank, meaning it'll go from the 1st of this year onwards. I can select by campaign groups or by campaigns, and if we only wanted to do certain campaigns, having a campaign group would have been nice. We could have then selected by campaign group. I actually want to see them all, so I'm just going to say no to each of these. I'll say no to grand total only. and I'm going to say yes to subtotal. So what that will give me is one campaign for each campaign that's been donated to in the specified period of time. And I'll just do a print preview. Before I do that though, notice down the bottom it says a tab delimited file called campbd.txt will be created for import into other programs. So whatever this produces on the screen, there will be an associated tab delimited file in a subdirectory under DM work called report_txt, and the file will be campbd. You could open that in Excel and get the same information. Anyway, I'm going to do a print preview. So that's going to run through all the donations. Oh, there's only been 40 this year. And you now get a list of all the campaigns that have been contributed to or donated to this year. So it's a great way of just working out, well, how well is my campaign going, or what have people contributed to so far this year, which is the highest, which is the lowest, whatever. Now, you might look at that and go, I've got 10 donations to this one called CACQ. Who gave those donations? So if I escape from here, I can run again, and it's still got the same details there, but I'll select by campaign, and I'll just nominate maybe CACQ in this one. And if that's the only one I want, I'll just leave the rest blank. And then I run the report again, but this time I'm going to say no, subtotal for each campaign only, no. So what I should get now is a list of those 10 campaigns, or those 10 donations. Okay, so there they are. So you've got the date and the amount, receipt numbers, and who it came from. Okay, so that's probably the most useful of the campaign reports. The other one works off the campaign screen, off the campaign record. So we can't look at donations within a date, but what we can do is we can look at the overall results based on that same statistics that we saw earlier on when we looked at the campaign record. We can exclude earlier campaigns that have been closed. I'm just going to run through this with everything, and again, this will create a file called campline.txt in that same subdirectory. Okay, so we see here there will be one line for every campaign that fitted into the appropriate criteria that we specified, which in this case really was none. But you'll notice in some cases some of them are grouped and some of them aren't. So in this case we've got a group code called 1A99, and there are two separate campaigns, 1A99 and 1ABCD, which are part of the same group. And then we have a subtotal for that group. Following on to that, we've got another one called 6069, and that also has two donations. We then have this one called AutoRAF, which is by itself. So what that means is this one is in the campaign group where there is only one in the campaign group. So as well as being able to see the overall results of your various campaigns here, it is an excellent way of just working out how your campaigns are being grouped. So you might look and say, well, here are my ball campaigns. And then later on you might see another campaign somewhere further down that's not in there, that you might say, oh, actually that should be part of the ball. So you can then go to campaign code and add or change the campaign code to the relevant one. So as we look through those, you'll see combinations of some that are parts of groups and some that are just by themselves. So very useful just to work out how your campaigns are grouped, but also to see how well you have done. Now, that's all that I was looking to present today, so hopefully that's been quite interesting. I'll now pass the time back to Marla, who can then feed me any questions that have been generated during the presentation.
Okay, thanks, Murray. As mentioned, if anyone had any questions, they can post them on the question pane, and we'll run through them now. There's just a couple that have already been posted, Murray. Angela was interested to know if you could just show again the file location and the report location.
Okay, all right. Well, if I go into mine, that would normally be under your DM work directory. There'd be a subdirectory. Now, I'm using the training system. I have a shortcut to take me to the DM train, but if you just assume that up there this was DM work, there is a folder in here called report_txt. So if I go into that now, and sort by date modified. The two that I've created were the campbd.txt and campline. Now they are just tab delimited files. So if you're familiar with opening up, merged data files that you've created from selection files, or if you've been able to import text into Excel, that's just the same way. So you just import or open up these files in Excel. Okay.
Thanks, Murray. And from Chris, just asking, if he creates a campaign to record a response to an email, how do you tell Donman which donors were emailed?
Well, you would, if you're actually emailing specifically to raise money for a particular campaign, you would create a campaign for them, and then you would update the donor mail history, which is part of the actual donor appeals menu. If I go back to donor appeals in here, the last option in there is a thing called update donor mail history. So if I go into that, I'll say yes, I've got a backup. I'll give it a selection file. It's a big one, 12 records in there. And if I say campaign here, I can then pick a campaign. So if I was mailing those 12 people for my tax 14, I can pick tax 14 from there. I can say update the post-mail response database. Now I won't go into a lot of this because this is really covered in other areas of the system, but if I say yes, I want to update the mail history summary, then that will update what's at the end of the second donor screen. Yes to update the full contact history, and I'll say tax 2014 mail out, something like that. I'll do it with today's date. Contact type is M for mail out. I'll say no to that. I'll say yes to update the number mailed. That was the question that I referred to earlier on. And if I run that now, that's now finished now. Obviously with 12, it's very quick. Now, I'm not entirely sure who's in my selection file, but I'll take a stab here. I'll hope that Johnny be good. Yes. So you can see here what I've done. I've brought up this first person, John Be Good. I've pressed F2 to swap me to the second screen, and down the bottom there you can see it now says that the last campaign mailed was tax 2014. If I was to create a batch of donations, there is a question that says, do you want to use the last mail as the default? And if I said yes to that and processed a donation to John Be Good, by default when we got to the campaign it would automatically come up as tax 2014 because that was their last mailed campaign. Okay. Now, if I click on contacts, because I also created a contact record, you can see up the top. Hang on, no, it's down the bottom. It's the other way around. The last or most recent one is down the bottom there, and you can see that he was mailed tax 2014 with a comment that says tax 2014 mail out. All right. So that's how you update it. So you need to have your selection file of who you've mailed to. If I actually go to that campaign code now and bring it up, because I said, yes, I want you to update the number mailed, it now says automatically that the number mailed was 12. Okay? Thanks, Marla.
Okay. Thanks, Murray. That looks to be the end of the questions for today. You've obviously covered everything very thoroughly. So we'll wrap it up there. So thank you, Murray, for today's webcast, and thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Just a quick plug for our next webcast. Our next live webcast will be on Tuesday the 17th of June, and that's at 2 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. And we'll be doing an overview of Donman's dashboards program. So we will have details in our next newsletter and emails out to you shortly. Now, also, if you wish to review any of the recorded webcasts, they're at our Donman website at donman.net.au, and look under the What's New navigation item. So if you do have any further questions about today's topic or some suggestions on future topics, feel free to contact us. Our email address is info_donman@advsol.com, or feel free to give us a call as well. So that concludes our webcast for today, and thank you for joining us. Goodbye.